Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Chapter Chats. I'm here with Dr. Chuck Hodel, and we're going to discuss his chapter for learning management systems. You have instructional design questions. We discuss answers. It's great to have you here, and I'm really excited to talk about learning management systems because there's a lot to it. And as somebody who is new to this field, I'm very interested in learning about open source opportunities for somebody who's doing, for someone like myself who might not be working for a corporation who has a learning management system, but wants to be able to have some kind of an opportunity to be able to have a place to host my modules so that I can showcase them for those clients who don't have learning management systems. So I'm sure we'll dig into that. But yeah, so one of the first things I'd love to pick your brain about with this chapter is when we think about learning management systems, what would you say are maybe the most critical advantages of using an LMS for designing online learning?
Yeah. I say that's a great question because the reason people use them, at least in my experience of what I've used them for, is the ability to scale up and down depending on what you need. So if you need 5 courses, that's one thing. If you have a university or a college and you have 500, 1,000 sections every term, you're going to want a learning management system because they do a lot of things for you. If you're a smaller organization, if you're a one-person shop, then you can look at other options. But learning management systems, I really don't know how you get by with them anymore. And I think we've learned that the last couple of years, too. Your ability to scale up very quickly based on the fact you can have shells and a lot of things that are in there and permanent, which you adjust as needed per section, but they still exist. And it's a lot easier design process once you set up those shells. Yeah,
and examples for those who are tuning in who maybe aren't aware, they need a little bit more information about what an LMS actually is. An example of one, if you're thinking about in a higher ed type of an environment, Blackboard is a great example, right? Of a LMS.
Blackboard is an example. Some would argue it's not a great example.
Maybe I shouldn't have used that
if you've ever used it or had to manage it. I had the experience of actually putting in a Blackboard system for a college after much discussion and going through the process of whether we hosted it ourselves or whether we had them host it and all the complications associated with that. So without having a 30 or 40 hour tape, which nobody's going to watch anyway, you just have to realize that there's a lot going on here and a lot of it's behind the scenes. And there's things that you don't even think about. So from an instructional standpoint for a designer, like we are, it's a great thing because you can produce a great number of shells based on a prototype that you put together and you make sure that it's consistent with what you need in terms of departmental needs and other things. And then you put the content in and any specific things that an instructor would want to change and do differently you can do. But the background on LMSs is it also ties to the administrative system. So your registrar is involved. You got all kind of stuff, permission to get into sections and how you populate sections. And a lot of people don't realize that these bubble up, as they call it, overnight. So even though a student is registered, it doesn't show up instantly in a section. It has to go through the process. And they'll pick a time, usually early in the morning, that they bubble up each of the sections with new students, et cetera. So I think it's really important from an instructional design perspective to realize there's a lot going on here. It's not just about the course. It's about the whole administrative system that goes with this. And obviously that's the advantage for a college or university is you tie all these things together and you don't have to worry about some of the other things that you would have to worry about if you try to populate a course by yourself online. So in terms of the advantages for an instructional designer, as I've mentioned, the nicest part is you can create the prototype section. You can put all the things you need in there if you decide you want to do grading, if you decide you want to do chat function, if you decide you want to do groups. There's hundreds of options you can put in these. And usually what you'll find is an organization will have a checklist of things that they want in there for each of these sections. So then an instructor can decide, do I want the grading? Do I want chats? Do I want groups? Do I want other things that we can link into here? And that's really the beauty of it. So when you're going through and you put an entire department or program online, you can run through that pretty quickly compared to trying to just do each one of these one by one and starting over each time. And that's where a learning management system, and that's why it's called a system, is because it allows you to do all of these things. So once you get them up, once you get them stable, once you get the bugs out, and there's always bugs, no matter which system you use, then you've got something you can really work with. And the other part of that, obviously, is you have to have the instructional staff and the students up to speed on how to use the system. Mm-hmm. So putting together tutorials and other things for students and faculty and designers is really critical when you think about this as a process.
That's very enlightening and helpful to understand that process behind it all. There's a lot of capability, it seems, and both from an administrative function, because there is that mm-hmm. need. That's absolutely a need when it comes to creating curriculum, especially large-scale curriculum. So it's very important.
And they're talking, I mean, these systems are not inexpensive. And I'm not going to say how much they cost because each situation is different, but you easily get into seven figures if you put it in for a large institution. And then you've got annual costs and programming and all the other things that go with it. So this is a major financial investment by an organization to do this. And typically it pays off in the end. But in the beginning, I remember the first time I started getting bids on this and I thought they can't be serious. Mm-hmm. And it was about half what it actually ended up costing by the time you got all the programming that you needed to tie your administrative system into the Blackboard system or any system. And so just know on the administrative side, it's a huge endeavor, but it does make it easier for us on the design side and instructional side.
Absolutely. And I would imagine, you have different size projects and you work for different size companies. And when you're working for smaller scale companies, looking for smaller scale training, an LMS is probably like a Ferrari, a little bit more than you need, possibly.
Well, it depends on what you get. And there are options. There's open code options out there, freeware, etc. There's an entire scale of these things. There's probably hundreds of options, and some of them are more popular than others. Some have entire communities that work together to help each other out when you have problems. And it's just a matter of how much time you want to invest in this. And is it worth it in terms of how much can you spend off project in the sense that you have to get the system up and running as opposed to actually designing courses and putting that together. So you have to think, if you're going to go into one of these other systems, how are you going to get people enrolled in your courses? How are you going to govern that part of it? And, it's a lot of work.
That's a lot of work. I mean, I've investigated some open source products out there.
And they're great.
And they seem like a great idea. I have not gone in deep to them, though. I haven't had the opportunity at this point to do that, but I plan to. But like anything else, any kind of program, any kind of software, there's going to be a learning curve for not only myself or the designer in this case, but the students, anybody that you bring on as an administrator to help you create this curriculum, to be able to help administer this curriculum. All of that needs to be taken into consideration too.
And you really need to do that. And if you're doing this by yourself, if you're a designer like we are, and you're saying that you want to try to put together a platform that you can distribute courses on, you have now gone from being a designer to now being a system administrator and a software engineer and all the other things.
In there.
Yeah, you're going to be a one-person shop that has so many dimensions. Are you able to actually do that? Or do you have other resources to be able to do that? And whatever you think it's going to take, you multiply it by 2 or 3 in terms of your time and investment, maybe many times more that when you first get started. I was just absolutely amazed how much time it took to get these systems up. And I'm sure somebody would come on here and say, Chuck, come on, they aren't that difficult. And I hope that's true. But from my experience, and I was pretty savvy at that point in software and hardware issues, I used to teach computer science. So it's not like I didn't understand what was going on. And it was still, these are vertical systems. The code is vertical. And even though it's open source, you still have to know what that source supplies to you and what the things are that you need to program and get into shape. If it has an interface already associated with it and it's just a matter of you putting in your courses, terrific, go for it. But just be aware. It's Pandora's box sometimes when you get into these things.
Oh, I'm sure we all love Pandora's box.
Yeah, we've all been there as designers. Yeah. Now you get to go there as a software engineer.
Something that's probably not in everybody's expertise in the toolbox, but
well, yeah, it was interesting.
Now all right, so we've just talked about some challenges associated with LMS. Are there additional challenges that we should be made aware of, that we should be considering?
Well, I mean, just like any population analysis, you have to find out what your folks have used in the past. If you're going to put a system up specific for what you're doing and you don't have a population body that's already accustomed to it, you have to figure in how much time and space it's going to take for you to get them up to speed on it. If you have instructional staff beside yourself, you need to get them up to speed. And these things are similar in some ways, they're different in other ways. And to say that you can seamlessly jump from one to the other, I think would be inaccurate. I'm sure there are instructors and others that are very good at this, and perhaps it's not that big a deal. You just have to look at scale and how much of this you're going to do, how much of your population is comfortable with the interface, and each interface is a little bit different. And there's always stuff. So I would say as a designer, you're going to do your systems approach. You're going to look at the population. You're going to look at the challenges. You got all kind of stuff going on. And I'm not trying to discourage anyone. I just don't want you or anyone to think you just jump into this and there you go.
Yeah, absolutely. In your opinion, what are the most valuable student learning tools available in an LMS?
There are so many. And I think the one thing is the fact that you can be asynchronous. So this notion of anytime, any place really is possible. And that's the way I teach my courses. I don't do live sessions typically because I've got students from all over the world. And it's just not realistic to expect somebody in Seoul, Korea to pop in at a 12-hour time difference. It's never worked for me. There are times when you can make it work, but I think the asynchronous complete package thing is really a valuable part of it. Should you choose to do synchronous, you can do that. Should you choose to have groups, you can do that. Do you do live chats? You can do that. All of this stuff is built into most of these systems. So a designer really has a full palette of things that they can work on and work with should they choose to do that. And I think it's just exponentially changed the interface and the way that we look at education, especially at a distance.
Now, you've talked about, some of the benefits and the advantages and some of the tools that are already incorporated. It sounds like most of these LMS systems are incredibly robust with so many different add-ons and abilities. In your opinion, do you feel like, have you ever come across a point where you're like, I wish they had this and this. I wish they had this in the LMS.
Every
what
time.
would those be?
Well, it's like the maturation of the systems. So when you first started using these, and I go back to beta testing some of these systems, I won't even give you the names because they don't exist anymore. They've been gobbled up by other systems. But, in the very beginning, if you could just get a course to run, you were doing pretty good with this. Because at that point, it was just basic stuff. And as you go through, the other thing that happens is each version of these things changes something. Sometimes they take things out, like they took out wikis out of some systems. And some instructors use wikis, whether it's their own or whether it's someone that they link to. And so is that integration possible? And I know in one system they took them completely out because of an external link that was just messing up everything. It was driving bandwidth through the ceiling and they just couldn't support it anymore. So what you'll find is many times what exists in one version disappears in the next version. And they usually don't do that with things that are constant staples of this, like discussion boards and the rest of it. But some very vertical courses instructors had that relied on some of these outliers. You get disappointed when it goes to a new system, and you have to be very careful about that.
Any additional thoughts on LMS before we conclude this episode of Chapter Chats?
I would say to any designer, don't be afraid of them. Don't be afraid to get in and dig in and find out what you can do with them. Don't be afraid to use them if you have access to them. And the one thing you want to think about is creating prototypes, create models, create section models, help instructors so that all they have to do is do their greatness with content and the little things that they'll want to do to make their courses unique from others, which you can allow them to do without major injury in most cases. And I think you really have to get accustomed to designing this way. It's different. It's different. So putting together the prototype, thinking about all the things that need to be in that prototype, which of course has to cover all the things an instructor might want to do, and then making sure that you can package that and move it on. But once you get into it, and once you get the rhythm of it, these things are incredible.
Thank you very much for your insights on this, Chuck. It's been very helpful. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in to this episode of Chapter Chats. Take care.